And actually, there is no agreed upon definition for either life or death. Here's a couple of quotes. This is just from the Wikipedia article on life. That's all this is from. The definition of life has long been a challenge for scientists and philosophers. No one has ever succeeded in giving a definition of life based on just physical factors that actually works. Now, we're not going to get into why that is because it's somewhat complex. But this is not a Christian source. This is the Wikipedia article on life and death. Listen to this. One of the challenges in defining death is distinguishing it from life. Death would seem to refer to either the moment life ends or when the state that follows life begins. So what happens after your life is over. However, determining when death has occurred is difficult, as cessation of functions is often not simultaneous across organ systems. So what this is saying, we can't go too deep, but what it's saying is that no one can define when death actually happens because there's different ways. There's sometimes a person can be kept alive after they would have died, even after it appears that their brain is dead, and they are clearly dead. We can keep their body alive. There's a famous case of someone who was kept alive, a child, for something like 10 years after they were dead. So what actually is death? The brain can also continue to function for some period of time after your body dies. It is very hard to define life and death. Such a determination, therefore, requires drawing conceptual lines between life and death. This is problematic because there's little consensus over how to define life. The nature of death has for millennia been a central concern of the world's religious traditions and of philosophical inquiry. Many religions maintain faith in either a kind of afterlife or reincarnation for the soul or a resurrection of the body at a later date. Now, that's a lot of words. It's basically this. It all comes down to this. Life and death cannot be defined as only physical. No one has ever succeeded in doing it. And when you try to define life, what actually happens is you try to define life or death, you immediately end up back in the realm of philosophy and religion. So what does that tell you? That life and death are actually not physical states. They're not. Now, there are physical states associated with life and death, but that's not what life and death are. Whoa, that's a deep idea. Can somebody close the back door for me? I just got some noise coming in from the other church. Now, we're going to use two illustrations to help understand how the Bible describes what death is. Okay? The first illustration is this, and this is pruning a grapevine. Some of those countries that we listed earlier are famous for grapevines, aren't they? And of course, the Bible uses this illustration a lot. It's used by Jesus. It's used throughout the Old Testament. Okay, so what actually is death? Now, sometimes pastors say this, and we talk about how the Bible defines death. The Bible doesn't really define death. It just describes it. And what you're going to see, I hope in a minute, is that you already recognize that what the Bible says about life and death is actually true. You already recognize it. You already experience it. Even though sometimes you've been trained to think death means my body stops working. Okay? Let me ask you a question. So we see what this guy's doing here. This is a farmer, and he's got some branches, grapevine branches, and he's cutting them off. We just had a church work day. Some of us did stuff like this. Have you been pruning your trees? Bushes in your yard? Some of you have been doing this a lot. So here's the question. These branches that were just cut off, like 1 second ago, are they dead or alive? Are they dead or alive? It's hard to answer, isn't it? The Bible says, and I think you will see that this is how you experience what death is. Death is when something is separated from something else. The branches are dead. They're dead, not actually in themselves. They haven't physically died, have they? Those branches, and that's why we're tempted to say the branches are alive. Because if you took one of those branches and put it in the ground, it could grow again, couldn't it? Now, 2 weeks from now, if it's dried out, no longer true, right? But right now, there's still, all the physical processes are still happening inside those branches. But they've gone through death with respect to the vine. Death also has an object. Okay, if you're brushing up on your languages, you know the direct object, right? It's not just that things die to something. The branches are dead to the grapevine. Those branches could be, this is actually a thing people do, those branches could be taken and grafted into another vine or tree and then become alive with respect to that new tree. But the branches are dead, and what death actually is that separation. I'm not saying that's what we call death, I'm saying that's what it is. The fact that our bodies stop functioning is the result of a separation.